Welcome to the Set to Lead podcast, the online mentoring platform for emerging and current leaders. My name is Marianne Samdi, leadership coach and talent development expert, and I will be your host.
Get anonymous feedback on the overall performance of your remote team or your individual virtual leaders using a simple-to-use, cost-effective, and mobile-friendly online team assessment. Learn more at www.settolead.com.
Welcome to the show, Loreta.
Thank you. Thank you, Marianne.
You're welcome. The show today is about executive presence, and I really can't wait for us to get started with that conversation. But before we get started with this discussion, let the audience know a little bit about your background.
Sure. I am originally from Lithuania. I always feel bad leading with this, but that's my that's my background, and some people who are good at picking up on accents would clarify that all up front, why I have an accent. I was born and raised in Lithuania. I moved to the United States in 2003, and back in Lithuania, I studied broadcasting journalism. I was news anchor, news reporter, docuseries host, and when we moved here to the United States, I transformed that career into video storytelling. So video producing, coaching executives on camera, business owners on camera, how to better tell their story about the businesses, the products, and how to better be, and how to be more effective communicators, that would help, elevate themselves as well as, their company or business by extension. Throughout those past years, cumulatively 20 years of experience in video producing, storytelling, communication strategy development, my role has grown into broader scope. And I'm really focusing these days on helping companies that are going through transition period to get their marketing communications and executive communications sort of cleaned up and sorted out, because those transition periods are always the most challenging to implement certain processes, certain, consistency in how the brand appears visually outside the walls of the building, right, to the audiences, as well as how to streamline internal and external communications, elevate executive presence through thought leadership, and by extension, again, elevating the brand. So it's kind of a twofold approach in how I work, directly with executives and, leading and structuring the marketing and communications functions.
I'm really happy that you're providing this level of service and support because it's really important. I wanted to start off by asking, can a lack of executive presence hinder career advancement or business growth, even if one possesses exceptional skills and qualifications?
Yes, I believe strongly that it's not only about the skills, but how do you actually tell your story about your skills, right? How do you get noticed? What visibility do you gain inside the organization or outside for that matter? What perception do colleagues have about you, right? How does that help you network or be more effective network in the networking environments where you have to build relationships with other leaders in your industry? So I do believe it's not just about the skills, but also how you carry yourself as an executive or aspiring executive leader, right? Because there's always these different layers of executives that we can think about, right? Is starting founder, where the person is just figuring out upon the founding of the company who they are, how to run the business. Then in a corporate environment, there's aspiring executives, this middle management section that nobody really talks about or trains them to become more effective leaders so they could advance in their career inside the organization, right? So all of this, when you think about it, skills are great. That's what gets you in. But how do you then advance with your skills, and how do you build that trust, around yourself through how you communicate, through how you engage, through how you lead, I think is equally important.
So you mentioned here about it's important on how you tell your story and how you tell your story about your skills. So I would imagine that's about how you position yourself, correct?
Exactly, 100%. A lot of times when you work in a corporate environment, you are pigeonholed to a certain track, right? So there's an individual contributor track, and some people are really happy of being individual contributors, but some who want a little bit more out of their career, who want to lead the teams, who want to be the followers, right? Who want to have a little bit more influence inside the organization, they have a slightly different track. So how do you position yourself? How do you translate that skill set that you own into more visibility inside the organization? It all depends how you tell that story, right? In any presentations to leadership team, how do you come across? How do you provide your perspective, on a particular issue that, let's say, an organization has, so that you start establishing yourself as an internal, thought leader first, right? And start getting noticed by others, right? So how do you translate your hardcore skills into being more of a business mindset, right? And that's what I think shifts the needle in the end. It's not about, let's say if you're an engineer, it's not only about coding or being good at, research and development, but also how does that tie back to the business, right? And I think these two sometimes get missed. And that's what sometimes builds that roadblock in enhancing yourself and giving that different flavor about yourself to the others in the company.
I want to stay here a little bit longer, if you don't mind, Loretta, because I
Of
think this
course, of
is
course.
really, really good. So, what are some common mistakes you've observed when it comes to telling your story from those in the field?
I think a lot of times people don't know where they add the most value, right? Uh, Sometimes we think that we are good at that one thing, and that's what drives us. And sometimes we just don't have enough courage to provide a different perspective, right? Because we might be fearful of being judged, or we might be fearful to be making a mistake or sound or look stupid, in front of the other leaders in the company. So those would be, the things that sometimes go through the minds of people in that prevent them from communicating on what they believe, right? By preventing them from finding these other avenues of how they could express themselves. So those would be probably some things that I've observed, right? But it also depends on the personality. Sometimes no matter how good you can be, or even if you do connect all the dots, it's just not your personality to pursue certain things, right? You might be just comfortable where you are and you don't want anything else, right? And it's enough for you. But for those who really want more, they have to learn to be a little bit more connected and intuitively with themselves, and just not being fearful to express, to not be fearful to share those ideas, even if you're not being called out in a meeting, right? To say something, raise your hand and just say something about it. This builds, again, it gives a different perspective, right? Among the team members about you, right? Nobody might have thought that you have these thoughts and ideas because you never expressed them. So it's very important to be more proactive about your career versus reactive, right? You don't rely on other people to drive your career. You really want to be upfront and center yourself and see how you can shape your own story, your own path, inside the organization.
You gave a great example a few moments ago you used the example of someone who's a coder, right?
Mm.
And you said that it's not just about your skill set of coding, but it's how you connect that to the business. And
Mm-hmm.
that particular example that you used, what would be an example? Because someone who's an IT or technical, they think coding is the value that they bring to the business. And it's
Yes.
not that it's not the value, but how would you tell them to add on to that to
Mm-hmm.
make it more to improve their executive presence and their storytelling?
Yeah, so one of the key things, especially, you mentioned IT departments or infrastructure builders inside the organization. Their key role, obviously, is to ensure that the data inside the organization is secure, right? I'm just using that right now as a department, right? Versus individual coders who are developing a product. It's a slightly different, mindset here. But let's use an organization, an IT department organization. That organization is involved in multiple departments when it comes to supporting the business, right? So let's
Yes.
say it's marketing and communications where they need to make sure that, the website is running, the infrastructure to support the traffic to their website is all implemented correctly. They have the right amount of people who can support the updates on the website, the updates on the different tools that we're using for sales, right, behind the scenes on the websites, right? So that's that. There's also, financial aspect of it, where the data, financial reporting has to be secure. So all these departments exist, and a lot of times only leaders of those departments actually go and talk to the other leaders. So kind of sub-departmental, communication, or cross-departmental, I should say, communication, versus, somebody who's a little bit more in the rut, so to say, doing the work, and they just are a little bit detached from those business conversations, right? So if you're in the role where you need to understand the business of why these things are important to these other cross-functional units, you have to be going and talking to those people there, trying to understand their problems, trying to figure out what solutions they need. Because, when executives, again, it's a little bit convoluted how I'm presenting it, right? There's established organizations, there's middle-level organizations or growing organizations. They all have different needs and flavors, I would say, of how you tell your story inside it. But let's say in a larger organization, a lot of times, a lot of these discussions are happening in a C-level, or let's say VP level, and it doesn't always fully trickle down the chain for those who are actually doing the work, for them to understand why they're doing, right? So if you want to be in that C-level and you're somewhere in the middle management level, so you better observe what those leaders are doing, first of all, and start making connections with cross-functional, units, business units and departments, to start understanding a little bit of the mechanism inside the organization outside of your IT department, right? It's very easy to just be closed off and just go one lane and then think that things are going to happen. But the moment you start being the moment you start understanding, how the business works, how these units are interacting with each other, what's important to each of them, you can start building your own almost internal influence, to direct leadership yourself, as well as outside of your direct department, to those business units, in providing solutions, getting ideas flowing. And then guess what happens? From that perspective, those other business units will start asking about you. Hey, this person, in IT department who I spoke to had a great idea. Then your leadership will start paying attention. Well, who is that person that everybody's talking about, right? Who is this person going, behind the scenes and trying to help others, right? And trying to influence and understand what's going on, so that, again, internally inside the organization, you then become also a much more effective, contributor as well, because you will understand a much broader scope of how the infrastructure is not built, but why it's needed and how it affects different departments inside the organization.
Excellent, excellent tips for the individual contributor. Let's talk a little bit about the executive.
Mm-hmm.
So, what are the company benefits from the company helping to improve an executive leader's presence?
Yes. So, when we talk about executives and companies, to me, this is one, how to say, it's two sides of the same thing. When executive is more engaged, when the executive leader's presence is, elevated, by extension, the company and the brand is elevated as well. Because imagine this, the executive goes to different events, does keynote presentations, or, be it on video in virtual environments or on stage, it's the impression and the face of the company into how they carry themselves, what language they use, right? How they talk about the industry, right? So that's outside the organization. Inside the organization, it is important, for teams, right? What do they feel from the executive? Is he or she engaging? Do they have an open door policy? Are they closed off? Do they say hello when they walk? Like, how do they communicate and engage inside the organization with their team? So all of that, by extension, builds a stronger loyalty with employees, and a stronger sort of awareness or connection to the brand and the company, when it comes to external audiences. So those two in my head always go hand in hand, by elevating an executive, by having the training that he or she needs to get them, to understand how they as individuals impact the company itself. Let's say when they represent it, right? It helps them connect those two dots in their head.
Absolutely. Do you feel that certain individuals with quiet personalities still exude strong executive presence, or is it reserved for more assertive types?
It is stereotypical to think that somebody who is more outgoing and more extroverted by default is a better executive, or has by default a better executive presence. But it's it's not necessarily true, And recently I've been pondering and kind of thinking through, okay, who are in the world these executives that people admire? How do they come across, to the audiences, And one of the recent examples that I actually shared was Elon Musk. If you look at Elon Musk, he comes across as a quiet leader, right? He comes across as a reserved leader. He's never rushing to answer the questions. If you see his interviews, he's never rushing to answer the questions. He's always challenging the journalist, based on his perception, about things that he believes in, right? He's not afraid to push back. He's not afraid to share his beliefs. And then we as audience then form a certain perception of who that person is, how he carries themselves, right? How that executive presence comes across. So I wouldn't necessarily say that only extroverted people have great executive presence. Is how do you extract what's authentic to you, and represent it in your through your values externally, right? And that's what people will tune in and start picking up on, because presence also is personal brand, right? It ties together with a personal brand. So as an executive, you sometimes are being coached how to talk, how to, talk in sound bites, how to handle media, how to be more effective communicator. But from the personal brand perspective, it's what's driving you, what values do you believe in, and how does that combined with your executive presence comes across, to the external and internal audiences, right? So sometimes obviously quieter people tend to be less noticeable, right? And because they are not out there, they're not pushing themselves as as forthcoming as extroverts. But it does not mean that they don't have the thoughts. It's just their thought process and how it all comes out is different, right? It's a matter of giving them the platform to actually share those thoughts, and giving them the platform to lead certain projects that will give more visibility to them, right? To those types of more timid, leaders.
I observe various leaders that are popular, that are in the
Mm-hmm.
stream. So it's interesting that you brought up Elon Musk, because Elon Musk is always being interviewed, and I just recently watched a current interview on him recently, this
Mm-hmm.
past week actually, and people interpret Elon Musk as being charming, and when you observe other popular leaders that society likes, I hear that word a lot. The reason that they think they have a great executive presence is because they believe that they're charming. So I'm
Hmm.
wondering, is that part, having an excellent executive presence, does it have to be charming? If you're not charming, does that mean that your executive presence is minimal?
And
Your thoughts on that?
it's an interesting question. I never thought from that perspective, but immediate thinking of mine right now is that charm is also very subjective. Like when I look at Elon Musk, I don't think he's charming.
A
You know,
lot of people think
to
he is.
to
I
me,
was
he's not.
surprised too. Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
So I think the understanding of charm can be subjective, right?
Mhm.
Let's say if I were to say who's charming to me as a leader, who I'm trying to think off the top of my head right now. Nobody comes to mind so quickly. But charm to me is more energetic, like energy, right? Energy that's more activated, what makes you, a little bit more hyper, when you listen to them, right? That's how I understand charm. When I
Yes.
listen to Elon Musk, he's charming in a certain way, but that's not the word how I connect. And maybe it's my English language,
Yeah.
problem, who knows?
Yeah.
But charm, you don't have to be charming to have a good executive presence, or a presence that wants one that makes one to follow you, right? It's more about how you express yourself, is I think what drives people to lean towards some leaders or the others, right? It's if you're obstructive, if you're using language that doesn't make you feel good, then nobody really thinks that you have a good executive presence, right? But if you're thoughtful, no matter what the energy level is, right? When you're hearing them speak, it's how they make you feel. What is that they're saying? What do you understand from how they use the words? How they form the sentences, and how they pause before they present something or say something. Or not pause, for that matter. It's all about the style. What is your internal leadership style, what that matches your personality, right? Like, if I hear a lot of people tell me, Loretta, you're just fast, can you slow down? I don't know how to do that. I'm really sometimes trying. I have to force myself to slow down. Even right now, I'm speaking probably too fast. I don't know. But sometimes I'm thinking, wait, I need to slow down, Loretta, I need to slow down. Even before this podcast, I thought, okay, I'm going to just slow down, but I can't, because my personality is fast, right? So if that's what drives you, and you're able to communicate when you need to communicate, there are people who are going to be repelled by you. There are going to be people who are going to be drawn to you, right? So it's all about being true to yourself, and finding that leadership style that works for you, and that ties back to the values that make you, or to the values that you want to have as a leader, right?
Yes.
So that's how I look at it.
You were talking about a lot of executive presence is subjective. So I was wondering, are there cultural differences in what constitutes executive presence that you're aware of?
I think to an extent there are. If you look at Japanese executives, or leadership, how they run their leadership teams, and in general in Asian, I would say, right? And when I say Asia, I mean more Japan, and let's say China, Taiwan, right? It's more hierarchical, right? And the way the executives carry themselves are more toned down, right? So people feel that they can't cross the line between certain things, right? Whereas in the Western cultures, a lot of those walls are being broken by open door policies. Executives are, being put on the spot to answer questions by, posed to them by employees. No scripts, no nothing, right? Just ask me on the spot right now and I will answer. So that there's a difference in that, from culture perspective. Now, again, a lot of it is also personality, how one leads, right? And I think culturally there could be a lot of personalities, even in Japan, leaders in Japan who are more extroverted, more outgoing, and they want to maybe do something different, right? Than what the cultural norms are accepting. So that would be my thought on the cultural differences. I would say it's just the Western world is a little bit more open, and more not afraid, I guess, to make a mistake, and executives admit that mistake. But in other cultures, this would be a little bit more hierarchical, how it's structured and how executives are being perceived.
Let's talk about gender a little bit. Do you think there's any gender biases that impact perceptions of executive presence?
That's a tricky one. A woman or a man can be equally impactful as executives. It's not, when you're not born with certain skills, as an executive, you are trained to become one, right? Through the years of your experience, as, you start an associate and you climb the career ladder, and you gain all that, training and coaching, as you go along, or you seek that yourself, on an individual basis. So if the organization does not provide it, then you have the opportunity to seek that knowledge yourself and get better, yourself. So I don't think it all depends only on the gender. I do not believe that theory myself. So from that perspective, I think it's all about how much effort do you put in your self-growth? What are your aspirations? Who do you want to become as a leader, or do you even want to be a leader, right? And how do you get there, right? So it's all about the skills that you provide, the knowledge that you share, the benefit and the value that you add to the organization, the ability to surround yourself with people who vouch for you, right? Who believe in you, the mentors, the sponsors inside the organization, right? Who could be your advocates behind the scenes. And that goes across male or female, honestly, So it's more about the environment that you're in and how do you seek those opportunities yourself. If obviously they're not present in that particular organization, then you start looking outside, right? That's why sometimes people leave. But I don't think it's a strong differentiator, on who is a better executive, who has a better executive presence, woman or man. I don't think that's relevant.
So let's say you seem to like examples and hypotheticals.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say you're a woman who is working on her executive presence, and
Mm-hmm.
you are in a meeting or at an event where it's primarily males. Is there a certain way as a woman you should temper yourself based on the audience at hand? Is there something different that you should be keeping in mind when it
Hmm.
comes to executive presence and presenting to a group of males and vice versa?
You know, I'll speak from my personal experience, okay?
Mhm.
And that can and your audience can either take it or leave it, but I'll speak it from my personal experience and similar not examples, advice I've given to other women, in my circle who were very timid when they would enter the room full of men. And yes, when I started my business in 2010, I had to network a lot. Okay, and I lived back then in Silicon Valley, and I wanted to work with technology companies. And guess what? Back in 2010, the only people in technology were men. So I would go into a room full of men to network, and I'd be like, oh, what do I do now? It's like all eyes on you because you're a woman. You stepped into the room, and everybody's like judging you from whatever's going on in their heads, right? Perspective. And it could be a personality trait, but it also a skill that one can learn, the networking skill, right? The being able to break through the barriers of conversation, no matter if it's a female or a male, by just talking and listening. So my tactic, and that helps me because that's my background, my tactic has become has been back then and still continues to be to ask questions and have people talk. And that's what I started doing, because I'm very curious by nature. I would just come up to a group of men standing and having a conversation. I would introduce myself and I would say, here's me, here's what I do. What do you do? Tell me about your business. Tell me about your technology that you're developing. And I would just let them talk because that's how, first of all, I would gain experience and understanding of different types of technologies that are around, right? And then understand, how do they communicate about it? Are they
Mhm.
clear? My opportunity was almost an indirect coaching. If they're not able to express what they're working on, I would become a very deep journalistic investigative journalist and would continue poking and poking and poking until I understand the concepts they're trying to convey. So I think one of the tips maybe I could give to the female audience, if you're in the environment like that, own it. Own being yourself, own who you are. It doesn't matter if they're men or women in the room, right? Just you can't be afraid to talk and to express your thoughts. The right or wrong, people agree or disagree with them, does not really matter. It's you owning your knowledge, you owning your sharing that knowledge, you owning, making sure that, let's say, your comment is heard, That's, I think, what's important, and that's actually admirable, because you are not then hiding uh behind the wall thinking, oh my God, I can't do this, right? I can't, this is all men, I don't know, this is going to be impossible for me to break through. No, you go up for a challenge if that's how you feel, and you see what happens. Break down those walls and ask questions, get people to list to talk about themselves. People like talking about themselves.
They
If
do.
you ask questions, they will talk and talk forever, about themselves, about what they do. And sometimes men really like educating, others who are less knowledgeable. So it's a part of their ego, and there's like educator comes, out of them, right? So it's really about that, I think, about owning and being proud of your experience and your expertise, and really not thinking of yourself less than is what's important.
Thank you for that, Loretta.
Of
As we wrap
course.
up, what final piece of advice or insight would you offer to our listeners who are seeking to improve their executive presence?
Well, one of the things I can say that it's not one and done kind of deal. You always have to find ways to connect, with your audience, be it internal or external. It's you have new employees, they need to be onboarded, you have to build new relationships with them, right? Let's say the company is going after new markets, right? You have to understand the audiences there, how you communicate, to those other multicultural type of audiences, right? So I think it's a learning journey, that a leader constantly has to go through. It's not like, oh, I did this course, or I, was coached by let's say Loretta, and now I'm done, I'm good. No, you always have to tweak and find and adapt, things that work throughout your career. You will change careers, you will advance to different roles, higher roles, and this will require yet additional adjustment, right? What you've learned maybe as a middle manager, it may not be as effective, when you're in a senior level position. So it's a constant journey, is what I've learned. It's never a done deal. It's just building upon what you've learned before, enhancing and getting just better and better and better.
This was a great conversation, Loretta. Thank you so much for all these tips and tricks around executive presence. How can people follow your work and learn more about this topic?
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking, Marianne. I have a very wonderful downloadable presence checklist. It's very valuable for those who would like to assess, where they or their company is at when it comes to presence. So it counts the points. It kind of shows, what the summary of points looks like and where you fall in the bucket. And you can download that on my website, loreta.today. And Loreta is spelled with one T. Loreta .today, Loreta.today. Very easy to remember. And you can download it there, go through that list on an executive level, or founder level, or whichever level you are, or on a company level, and see how those points add up. And if you need any help, obviously reach out to me, and we'll be able to figure out how we can go through some breakthroughs together. And I'm also on LinkedIn, so those who are listening to it, to your podcast, feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. Just mention that you heard me on Marianne's podcast, and I'll accept the invitation. So those are the two platforms where you would get the most out of, when it comes to my work.
Thank you, Loretta. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much, Marianne. It was a pleasure being here.